I'm Sherry Heinisch, your host. Welcome to Nightcap Unfiltered, the series that pulls back the curtain on the events, trends, and headlines that dominate the sustainability and supply chain world. Because the most honest insights never happen on stage. No jargon, no greenwashing, just the raw, unfiltered truth. We're talking contradictions, quiet breakthroughs, and the moments that made us stop and say, did that just really happen? This is the conversation you wish you had at the hotel bar after the keynotes ended.
There we are.
Babes! And of course, do you have your gin and tonic? Okay, you haven't started drinking it yet. God, that's a huge drink.
It is. You bet she's got a shot. You're not messing around, are you?
So I'm actually gonna kick off with a shot, but I also have a chaser in this cool little cup. So James from the Vine Group, before we dig in, let's take a
Yes.
celebratory shot. And for folks who are watching, listening, whether it's tea in your cup or something a little bit more spicy, we're gonna start this off with a truly provocative cheers to candor, chaos, and calling it like it is.
Calling it like it is. I like that. Dear. Well, that should keep us honest. I guess there's a lot of those moments from Climate Week last week, and a lot of those moments.
Absolutely. It was interesting because, well, I know we're going to dig in, but on stage, there were many moments where I actually said, I don't agree with that. And I think, to your point, a lot of people feel like they have to have super polished answers that have been pre-approved by their comms team. And once the lights drop, once the mics are down or off on the side or in the evening, those same people have a completely different perspective. And I wish that would have been said on stage because we do each other a disservice.
And I think it's really, really easy to rain down on the COP process, the Climate Week process, in sort of saying it's nothing new. But I wonder, beyond just the control of corporate comms, what is it that stops people having an honest conversation? What's it that stops people humanizing? You and I have been to many events, and we've spoken to many folks over the years,
And been kicked out of them as well.
and been kicked out of them as well. But it strikes me that we're not having an honest conversation. And it's not that we're not having an honest conversation. We're not using words that we use in everyday conversation either. We're hiding behind this sort of prose that just makes it inaccessible to a lot of people. But why? We all know the problem. So what stops us coming out and saying, and I know there's going to be people screaming, going, well, it's because it's share price, it's stock price, it's brand damage. But hang on a minute.
Politics.
Politics as well. We can come on to that. But you pull back the curtain, and the brands that are doing really well in this space, really well, like authentically, genuinely well, are the ones who go, do you know what? It's hard. Do you know what? It's broken. We're going to try our best, but we're not going to get there overnight. And you don't see that in those moments. That's leadership for me. That's where you want to see the leadership.
I do think that the work is still happening and the investment in climate action broadly, decarbonization, circularity is still happening. But people are 100% turning the volume down in public in the wake, I think, of not only regulatory risk, but shifting geopolitics. People are definitely quieter. And the signals that I watched for from the sidelines, there are fewer press releases. There's stronger focus on measurement and on data, although Scope 3 is a conundrum. It's a web of assumptions for a lot of companies. One of the most provocative moments was at the Nest Climate Campus, where there was and I'm not going to call him out, but there was a guy on stage before me, and when he was speaking, I was like, "That's bullshit. That's not true. That's not true." And no one talked about the 3-point turn in Scope 3. That as your data and your processes become more mature and you move from spend or hybrid based methodologies into primary data collection, your progress is going to appear to go backwards. No one talked about that. But, like, everyone was talking about supply chain, so for folks listening, if you're in supply chain, procurement, manufacturing operations, distribution, logistics, last week was your moment. And I said, just out of curiosity, how many folks in the room actually work in supply chain? And it was like crickets,
Yeah.
crickets.
I'm hearing that more and more myself. And I guess for context, you were there in person. I was watching online. We both had friends in town, but um, I guess I had a slightly different perspective from what you had and
Your
being in the
drink.
room. And
You have to take a sip of your very large gin and tonic, my friend.
okay, I guess is the problem that, well, I guess you said, on the side conversations in the sort of spaces after the panels. Is that where the real relationships are being built? Is that where the real conversations are
Yes.
happening? Is that where people are
Yes.
letting their mask down and saying, actually, do you know what? If only we could crack this, we'd be away. Because if that is the case, and this was, by most estimates, the largest New York Climate Week to date. So people still gravitate towards it for whatever reason. I mean, there's obviously UNGA happening at the same time. We can come on to that in a bit. But if people are still coming, are they having the right conversations? Are they meeting the right people? Is this being progressed? Or is it just a look at me on stage?
Both can be true at the same time. So I absolutely, I've been to New York Climate Week. I've been to London Climate Week. And I definitely feel like there was a lot more progress and connections being made in terms of financing the gap and financing the change and transition. And that is something that, particularly on Sunday at Unstoppable Africa, I saw a lot of those connections being made with really cool climate hard tech startups and more in the electrification space, industrial AI solutions. A lot of progress being made, but the conversations on stage for me, they just felt very rehearsed.
Hmm.
My channels weren't rehearsed. And I think that's
Of
why
course.
people asked me, either to moderate or participate, and you find people like you at these events, and you find, like, this coalition of folks who do wanna disrupt the status quo in a meaningful way. There's a change in leadership happening as well. I think,
Mhm.
this next tier of emerging leaders that have been in middle management are now being promoted into those roles where they're decision makers, and they do lead differently. I think they're struggling right now. And I mean, Tuesday, I'm sitting on stage. I had no idea what Trump was saying in his address. But when I got off stage, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, did you just hear that?" And then I just hop on my phone and I'm just like, "Oh God." And no one talked about it.
No, and I guess back to your point about no one talking about it because of the political and fear is probably not a misplaced word, but it feels a bit extreme. It was unfathomable that during UNGA, during Climate Week, just uh, the sheer reverse of the conversation that was happening elsewhere in New York. In that exact moment where the eyes of the world were on United Nations, and it was the contrasting voice to all of those other tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in New York. To your point just now about everyone says safe things, no one asks difficult questions. Where's that gone? At what point did we stop calling stuff out or saying, hang on, can I just double click on that? It's just saying, can we dig into the science a little bit? But it was an unfathomable week of contrasts.
It was polarizing because
Mm,
clearly people were, in their camps, and again, it might not have been as apparent in person, but certainly in some of my posts and people who reacted, some of the comments I left, some of the people got blocked, especially around, like, the progress of renewables and just the physics and the costs of extraction and
the
all the things.
truth.
Yeah, and the truth, exactly. I had the honor of watching Paul Pullman unpack a lot of this for 30 minutes, and, it's interesting because I do think that the camps are very much, like, on the lines, not as vocal, as they used to be, But then also, I struggle with what does it mean to be truthful and honest in
Mm.
this space where people are not necessarily given grace if they are forthcoming, if they are honest about regressing or maybe, falling back in some of their original commitments, science-based targets, net zero commitments. And there are many other smaller commitments that roll up to like, what is this organization's purpose and meaning in the world? And it's really hard. And I don't know, frankly, since this is supposed to be like the raw, unfiltered truth, do we give people grace when they regress in their commitments?
I
And
think
and
that's
by no intention of their own, it's just part of like the squiggle, the wiggle.
and it's the messiness of the change, right?
Yeah.
This is not a straight line transition. And I guess just to come really quickly come back on your previous point, we've not done a very good job as a community in bringing those folks along who don't think like we think. We've spent a long time using a burning platform, telling them that the sky is falling, telling them that this is far worse than we ever thought it was. And it is. If it then doesn't happen out the window, people then say, well, hang on a minute. There's a lot of talk this year about kind of pledges to practice, transitioning to action. Brilliant. We should have had that conversation 5, 10 years ago. But we've just got to get better at reaching the people that don't think like you and I think, that aren't on the bus already, because that polarization is only going to get worse if we don't tackle that. And I think you had a lot of language um, last week about resilience, thinking about the economics. Well, of course, that's what we always should have been talking about. That's how the global economy is built. It's built on growth. It's built on economics. We can't shy away from that, but we've got to frame it in terms of the best economic choice that then has the unintended consequences of positive environmental and social action. In 2025, it's no longer good enough just to do the right thing. We've lost that argument, unfortunately. So we need now to come back and think really hard as a community about how we bring the CFOs, how we bring the middle managers in a way that meets them where they are, rather than trying to beat them with our language.
Yeah, I agree with you on sustainability and value creation and the economic benefit. I think there's something other than just economics though, and that's performance and quality. So one of the things
Yeah.
you want to make a sustainable product, but does it hold up in terms of the way that it shows up in your value chain? Its performance should not be compromised. And there's a
No.
lot of investment that has to happen upstream in R&D, and I do worry about that. I do worry about the business case for sustainable products, sustainable materials. I think it's there, but that standard of excellence it's much harder than a business as usual product. I think the other thing which everyone was talking about was data centers and AI, and I'm not going to belabor the
Yeah.
point, but energy equity, it just felt very like first world in a lot of the panels in the rooms that I was in where, everyone's throwing I mean, I don't wanna call out companies. Are we gonna do that?
Maybe not on episode one.
Not on episode
Let's
1,
get a
yeah.
bit braver. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get some cease and desist letters.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But, data centers were in the spotlight.
Mhm.
Everyone was talking about data centers, and they were talking about electricity demand is growing and water scarcity, and, like, how do you have a clean, firm power strategy? And some of these choices really sit under a lot of scrutiny, as they should. The volume and the
Mm.
change in the investment that's needed, people can't comprehend it.
No. No.
Massive.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the flow of capital. That's one thing I don't know that I mean, I always understood it, but, like, this is really a finance conversation in many, many
Yeah.
arenas. It's a
Yeah.
money conversation, money and power, it comes down to it.
And it's again, it's not a new conversation. We've been talking about how do you finance the transition for over a decade. We need to find patient finance, smart investment, patient investment, and yet we're still kicking around. So what is the different approach? Again, for me, it comes back to a little bit about how you talk about it in the language you use that resonates with that community versus the community that you and I spend a lot of our time in. So that how do we talk about those distributed financial models over time? And that's always the challenge, right? When we think about some of the sort of theory around circular economy and thinking about the billions, if not trillions of dollars of unlock that could happen, it's not unlocked in the way that we see it or appreciate it today. So because it's hard for people to see it in.
Yeah. And so some of the highlights, I think, just for folks to walk away with, data was really at the center of a lot to
Yeah.
really set the order of play and to be able to quantify risk, financial return, environmental return compounded. There was also a lot around talent, James. Not only upskilling, but like sustainability really should be everyone's job. And the reason that that's important is because these choices start here. And I think they're gonna have to stand up to audit, scrutiny, and public trust. And again, I know some of the regulations, the acronym soup that everyone's familiar with,
Keep
they are
getting
being it's a
pushed
bit of
back.
kick the can. There's kick
Yeah.
the can, yeah, EUDR, for example.
Hmm.
Overall, I shared data, better quality of data, interoperable data across networks, and the general, um, I think the theme in the room after the mics were turned off was proof beats promises, and that happens in your value chain and with credible data, quality data.
And you're starting to see that come up more and more. And folks have been talking about it for a while, but it's now becoming more commonplace where brands are starting to recognize saying where they're going to be in 10 years' time is nowhere near as important to both them as an organization, their brand, and their people than proving something has changed today. My push is always in implementation. There's a lot of very smart strategy consultants out there. There's a lot of very smart advisors out there.
You're generous.
There's some not so smart ones as well, but it's a very noisy space where there's a lot of hustlers. Personally, I think we need to get away from this idea of a perfect plan or a perfect data set. We just need to get going and get started. You need to do it with a sense of moving in the right direction and driven by the science. Implementation is the tough bit. That's why there's backsliding. It is scope 3 is incredibly difficult, especially in certain industries where the supply chain is as opaque as they come. You think about fashion, you think about electronics, there is a real challenge in knowing where this stuff comes from and where it's going and who owns it and its kind of journey around it.
And things come out of boxes. There was so much around digital passport and enterprise blockchain. Even if we take DPP, for example, yeah, you're never going to get away from the physicality of a supply chain.
No.
Shit is picked up and it's moved from point A to point B to point C, and it can come out of a box.
Yeah. And I fully appreciate and respect the need and the use of things like digital twinning and understanding that from a perspective of kind of what are the decisions we need to make in the future, what are the maintenance processes, all of this sort of thing. How do we make sure that we can build those systems at scale? But you're right, there's a physicality to it. There is actually, what are we going to do different? How are we going to make this material move through our supply chain in a different way? And you get that by bringing the right people around the table and experimenting, innovating, trying and failing and trying again. But to your point before, proof is better than promise. I think
They
people
do.
feel scared to be experimenting because this is tough. This is hard. It's not progressing. People are looking to make cutbacks. They're looking to carve things back. And for me, that is the definition of leadership. It's having the courage to step forward and say, do you know what? We've got to do something different and it's going to be hard, but I believe in it. I trust in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to wrap up on a positive note.
Yeah, of course.
We lost a hero yesterday,
Hmm.
James, and Jane always talked about hope and how important hope is. And so I thought it would be meaningful to talk about the power of hope. Now, hope is not a plan,
Yeah, I hope it's not a
but hope is
strategy. Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
it's certainly important. when you think about what's ahead of us, and you've said we're halfway through the decade of action a few times on the Supply Chain Revolution podcast. What are your thoughts just reflecting on the next 4.5 years?
Huge question.
Take a
I
sip.
guess,
Let's take a sip.
yeah,
Let's
let's
take
take
a
a
sip
moment.
together. Cheers again.
I genuinely think, despite where we are right now in 2025, there is already so much incredible work going on that is maybe happening behind the scenes, is maybe happening in the corner of warehouses, or, there is just a broader general awareness of this topic. Okay, it varies at different levels, but everyone is alive to the challenge. And that creates opportunities as well. And we're starting to see this. I guess that's a very cautiously optimistic way of saying, whilst it feels tough out the window, I think we're pushing in the right direction. The bit we've got to do now is just be clearer. We've got to be stronger, and we've got to be more determined to push those innovations and ideas forward, and trust in the fact that we are very good at a species at building and innovating and getting out of these sort of these problems. But we've got to back that up with leadership. We've got to back that up with standing tall and saying, do you know what? It's unpopular. It's more expensive. It's difficult, but this is how we make sure we're still here in 2030, 2040, 2050. So I think it's about being brave. I think the political landscape will continue to keep
Challenged.
us challenged. Yeah, keep us challenged for the foreseeable future. We've got to think about this through the lens of growth and opportunity, but you've got to frame it in a way that reaches the people that aren't being reached at the moment.
Love it. Well, James, this is our first episode of Nightcap Unfiltered. I hope you had fun. Let us turn this into momentum, momentum into outcomes, and outcomes into a future that people can believe in. Again, we want to make good on our promises and our commitments. And we also want to give light and truth to a lot of the conversations that aren't happening on stages that folks aren't seeing, but certainly we're both hearing. And I'm sure folks that are watching, hopefully this resonated with you as well. So here's to things that are off script and off the chain.
Off script, absolutely. Thank you, Chef. Thanks for having me.